All right, so let's just go for a little drive, and I had a few things I wanted to talk about. Hopefully it adds a little bit of value. I've been looking at some of the big meta subjects that everybody's talking about, and we could be covering current events and everything, which I know would be the way I could grow my channel the most effectively. But oftentimes the headlines are changing so quick, it just kills your content and it's no longer relevant. So I really like doing content that I feel like is gonna be a little more universal, a little more timeless, and can provide benefit no matter what the hell is going on in the headlines. So we may talk about some current events, but I want to talk about some concepts here and share some things, because this is where my interest is right now. We recently did an episode on Unslaved. Michael and I have been doing some different shows, and he's been presenting some very nuanced and balanced views on various genius level thinkers in the world of philosophy, psychology, history, politics, conspiracy, everything. And just trying to give everybody a much more balanced view of things, because we're in this world where you have to be on one side or the other. It's very polarized, very divided. When real intelligent thinkers are able to find the gems everywhere, we're talking about if there's profound truths or great discoveries or great ideas coming from great minds, a truly advanced and intelligent thinker has the ability to pick out the gems basically without having to buy into the entire philosophy of a thinker. Because you got to recognize that many thinkers have to go to an extreme with their particular theory or thesis on any given subject, because they have to represent that argument in the public square. And oftentimes you'll find that there's many people that you're reading about from history or even from our current time that you agree with a lot of things that they're saying and doing, but then there's things that they're into that you don't agree with. I mean, you probably find that with my work as well. And I find that with the work of many people that I respect, where I have many things I agree with and many things I don't agree with. And so we've been really talking about this a lot on the Unslaved podcast. And by the way, we're also building, I'm working hard in the background building a Substack version of Unslaved. It's not quite complete, but it is there. You can go and look up Unslaved podcast on Substack. And I've got about half of the Unslaved archive already there for you guys. So if you're interested in getting on that platform, there are many benefits that you can find over there, and you can make your choice as to where you'd like to get that content. But anyways, if you want to catch up, you can go to unslaved.com. It's all there, or you can head over to Substack. And make sure to also check out Michael Tessarian's new Substack page. You just look up Michael Tessarian on Substack, and he's doing exclusive articles, and he's in the process of actually uploading a book that he's writing. He's not putting it on Kindle yet. He's putting it exclusively on Substack, chapter by chapter. So you can go and get all that over there. But the concepts I want to dive in with you today in this drive is, first of all, talking about superiority and inferiority complexes. And you'll understand why this is relevant given the societal decay and the current state of the insanity and the hysteria going on in the world. That has been going on for a long time, but there's a reason why on Unslaved we talk so much about psychology, philosophy, and history, which a lot of people find to be boring subjects because they don't really understand the relevance and the importance of diving into this in order to get a better analysis of what the hell's going on, right? Everybody just wants the goods, the fun stuff. They want to learn about what the celebrities are up to, when's the Epstein client list coming out, what's going on with Trump and the economy and the tariffs, all the things, all the events and the happenings of the day, which are great. And I love getting into that as well. If you want my take on that stuff, you can follow me on X or Substack under the notes tab. That's usually where I cover sort of my little rants and ideas about what's going on with the current events. But we got to look past that, because the current events are just constantly unfolding and at a rate that we can't even keep up with. And so you have to look at the bigger subjects and the roots of all of these happenings that have happened throughout history, are happening now. You know, there's nothing new under the sun, really. And so that's why you go to the timeless wisdom and you try to make an analysis and find the gems, find what's relevant, find what's meaningful, and find where the solutions might be to our current problems. Because good news, great human minds throughout time have contributed to the sum total of human knowledge. And many of those great, old, wise bits of information and knowledge and wisdom have been lost through time. And we've gone through this great forgetting of what we've already discovered as a species. Some of these old truisms that are just age-old and universal, that don't change, right? The more we change, the more we stay the same. And so that's where I really like to focus, and that's what we've been doing a lot on Unslaved. And so getting into this idea of, like, looking in psychology, they talk about superiority and inferiority complexes. And it's just the way they look at the mind, the compartmentalization of the mind. And I'm not going to get into that. But just, here's my amateur take on this, okay? And I'm also going to do a little bit in this one about some of the subjects brought up, or the one subject specifically brought up in the recent show with Douglas Murray and Dave Smith on the Joe Rogan podcast. I listened to the whole thing. I thought it was I think everybody should listen to that conversation. Like, it's kind of like the summary of the entire debate about the whole Israel-Palestine thing, the Ukraine-Russia thing. And then they had a really interesting discussion about whether we should trust the experts, whether we should let average Joes have an opinion in public. You know, so I'm going to give my little take on that. But let's start with superiority and inferiority. So Michael did a whole show on this, and it's one of our recent episodes, and he got into the take on this, and I just want to give my little 2 cents for what they're worth. And I am not an expert in psychology, so you take it for what it's worth. I'm just going off my own life experience, observation, and the studies that I have done, and the fact that I've benefited from doing the Unslaved podcast and having all these guests and these actual experts and researchers on, as well as psychologists and whatnot, and philosophers, and just, you know, hearing it out and then kind of giving my little slant on it. And I see this dynamic everywhere, and it does absolutely play into the roots of tyranny and the roots of what we call evil, human evil, and why we keep seeing tyranny rise, and why so many people are blind to what's going on, and why actually people vote for dictators and vote for masters. They want the master-slave dynamic is another psychological thing that you want to dive into to understand the psychology of crowd consciousness, how mass hysteria or mass formation psychosis even happens, how it can happen across a group, how it can happen across a culture or a country, how it can happen in a smaller area like a school or university, and how it can manifest within an individual. These are important elements to understand because we have to get to the roots of the thing. And the roots of the thing happen in human consciousness. And so you got to study human consciousness. That means you got to study human psychology. You got to study the summation of ideas that have come from the human mind. You want to look at them from both the pro and con. You want to look at it objectively as much as possible. And so if we're thinking about master-slave dynamics, whether in relationships or in the relationship with the powers that be, and we're talking about superiority and inferiority complexes, it's funny how that's seen. Like, if I say superiority or inferiority, those are looked at as two opposite things. If somebody feels like they're inferior, so they try to compensate for that. There's this compensatory effect that happens when someone feels inferior. Inferior to what? Well, inferior to other people, or inferior to the grand scale of all of nature and reality. There's these feelings that can be generated, and from that place manifest these tendencies that lead to what we call the 7 deadly sins, or these different things, whether they're sins, quote unquote, that we commit against others, or whether they're sins we commit against ourselves. There's a root to the motivation behind the self-destructive habits that we often see in ourselves and in other people. And what would happen if you found out that these age-old aspects of human consciousness development have actually turned into political parties and have turned into advertising slogans, and that there's a knowledge amongst the high-level elite world about how this works in the human mind? Because in order to gain any level of success, you need to understand human psychology on a mass level. And whether you're trying to have success in something that's really good and benevolent and there's nothing shady going on, or whether you want to have success with some kind of criminal enterprise, or to set up a totalitarian government regime, or to set up a multinational corporation that's involved in ripping off the world, or whatever it is, you have to have a knowledge of how our psychology works. So it's important that we individuals out there, us little people, have a knowledge of this as well, to give us some level of an advantage, so we don't just fall for every shiny object that gets put in front of us. And this is why we got to talk about inferiority and superiority, because if we think inferior types, we call them a typology, a type of person that, you know, is cast into this particular victim consciousness. This would be the victim consciousness person, the little man syndrome that maybe someone like a Wilhelm Reich would have talked about. He wrote a book called Listen, Little Man, and he's trying to talk to young men to say, right now you're a little man who's a victim of everything, and your consciousness is stuck in sort of a box, but there's hope for you, little man. You could become a great man, and you just need to understand what's the difference between the little man, the one stuck in inferiority complex, in victim complex, and little man syndrome, as I've called it, or what you can do to become a great man. That every man has the potential to become a great man. That was the push for it. But he speaks like a father figure in that little tome. And I thought of him when I was thinking about what I wanted to talk about. And so that you think of, okay, so yeah, you've described loosely what is the inferior type, the typology, right? The person that suffers from this inferiority complex. And then you go, okay, well, so yeah, so I'd say that inferiority complexes, it's rampant. It's the pandemic of international concern, right? You got a whole generation of adults walking around in adult bodies that have the consciousness level of an adolescent, because they're in a state of arrested development psychologically and spiritually. And so they are perfect targets for the big mass media complex and the big power brokers that are just trying to lead you down the garden path to whatever world they want to create. And we're finding out right now with all these investigations into government spending and corruption in all these big corporate enterprises and all these things in pharma and all that we just witnessed. We're starting to realize that someone out there must know something about us that maybe we don't know, and that they're maybe trying to breed inferiority complexes into you and into your kids, so that you are never empowered enough to stand up against what they're trying to accomplish, right? And you'd think, okay, well, these people must be part of the superiority complex group then. This would be the logic of the average person. Oh, well, it's like it's inferior types versus superior types. That's the battle. And it's the superiority complex people that are really running the world, and they are, you know, preying upon the people that are stuck in inferiority complex. You know, that's a sort of a simple equation, and it's not entirely wrong. But what I wanted to say was that I think that both types of people, whether we're talking the cunning, manipulative, psychopath, cult leader type, that would be like the superiority complex person, and they're preying on the inferiority complex person. This is sort of that cult dynamic I've tried to break down in many shows. It seems like they're two different types of people. And yeah, there's differences, But what about the sameness? What about the same root being behind the inferior types and the superior types? What if I told you that the superiority complex people are suffering from the exact same root disease as the quote-unquote disease, as the inferiority complex people? They both suffer from a feeling of inadequacy. They both suffer from deep-seated fear and anxiety about facing reality. They both suffer, which is why they have to manipulate your perspective of reality, right? You can go through all the categories under both, and you can actually see a lot of similarities between what looks on the surface to be two opposites. It's something Michael has always jokingly called opposames. They're so much alike that they look opposite. They're not. They're cut from the same cloth. I've made this case when it comes to looking at political ideas and theories. We've had that whole debate about, what about the communists versus the fascists? Is that what makes up the extremes of the political spectrum? Is that it's just communism versus fascism? Or do we find out that there's not a lot of difference at all between the ideologies and applications of communism and fascism? We actually find that they're best buddies. They hang out on the weekends. They get their marching orders from the same scripts. They're just applied differently and the lingo's differently, but the end goal is the same, which is totalitarian central control, right? And we see the results of those experiments when done on mass populations for centuries now in various forms, right? I call it different flavors of the same Gatorade. It's all the same stuff. And we see that the toll that those ideologies take when they're implemented to those extremes in society is less freedom, more poverty, more tyranny, more democide, more genocide, more war, more inflation, more taxation, more, just more of what we don't want, and yet it's awesome. It's interesting that those ideologies are the most appealing when it hits the public mind, when it hits the mass mind. It's this weird pickle that we've always been in. And so you go, okay, so those are the big political versions of what I'm talking about here as the psychological root of that, the motivational drives, because you got to have drive behind ideas. There's a reason people become ardent communists and fascists or cult leaders or whatever, or cult followers. You make more money as a leader, apparently, right? Quoting Creed from The Office there, when he's like, yeah, I've both been a cult follower and a cult leader, but you make more money as a leader. But all jokes aside, it's all the same root, different expression. So that's what I wanted to say about that superiority types, the superior type, the person that has the superiority complex, meaning, probably people in your government, people in your own personal life, who knows, these people that sort of lord their authority on you, and they project this air of authority that they have over you, and they need you to worship them. They need you to bend the knee to them. They need you to capitulate to them. Those are the superior types. Those are the masters in the master-slave dynamic. It's just the same thing, just different words to describe it. And then the inferior types are the ones that need those cult leaders and those tyrants and those people in charge of their lives and giving them a prescription for life. So there's a relationship between the master and the slave. There's a relationship between the tyrant and the tyrannized. There's a relationship between the cult leaders and the cult followers. And I'm just here to say there's a relationship between the inferior types and the superior types. And both the superior and inferior types come from an inferior type. They're not the real leaders and alphas that they project themselves to be, these superior types. They're the same, because the need to control nature and control outcome and control reality and control the actions, opinions, and speech and activities of other people, the need to control in the superior type is just a direct reflection of the need to give away all of your own personal control and your personal power in the inferior type. It's just the opposite end of the spectrum, but it's rooted in the same thing, which is a fear of reality, the fear of consequence, the fear and the anxiety of feeling inferior and feeling like you, and the feeling of the superior type actually starts as the inferior type. And then they just blow up their big superego into a point where they're like, well, I've addressed that by becoming the superior type. But they never truly mature into a fully awake, fully conscious, fully empowered person who, when you reach that, because you know that they have not achieved that true sage-like quality, because the true sage, the true leader, the true free thinker, the true, think of any archetype you want of like the best version of humanity, that person doesn't need to control the outcome. In fact, that's what marks them as being the sage. It's what marks them as being the wisdom keeper, the one that has learned the lesson and has hit the balance point and is not in a state of inferiority or superiority. Doesn't need to be anybody's master and doesn't need to be anybody's slave. That's the free man, the free mind. So what looks like two extremes are really just reflections of the same root. And the only way to avoid those extremes and to stay in that center is to deal with your fear, right? Fear is the mind killer. Read that Frank Herbert quote. I put it in my chapter 9, Cult of the Medics. It's the mantra of how to navigate yourself away from falling into either of those psychological categories. The reason I wanted to bring this up is because when you talk about politics now, politics is just an extension of what's going on in the hearts and minds of every individual. It's when we get into groupthink now and group identities, that's the world of politics. And the world of politics is an aspect of philosophy as well that is studied, right? Politics is one of the branches of philosophy, and you study it. But philosophy is also one of the branches of psychology and consciousness study. So it all kind of comes back around. And if you understand this is an understanding I've been forming over these years. And I don't know, maybe I'm off, but this is just where I'm at in my observation of it all. Thinking about this for quite some time and just looking around at the state of the world and being in an advantageous position where I get to work with people of all ages and backgrounds in my martial art practice every day of the week. And you learn to observe human nature. And my job in my role as a coach in martial arts is to try to introduce people to their heroic archetypes, the hero within them, the warrior within them, that can help them get to that state of free thinking, free not just from some tyrant outside of themselves, but free from the tyranny inside, the inner conspiracy against yourself, that you self-sabotage yourself all the time, 24/7, not knowing why, that it's rooted in self-sadism. You don't know where that comes from, which is self-hatred. It's rooted in the hatred of wisdom, and the hatred of wisdom is back to the hatred of the self, right? And this gets really deep and really personal very quickly. But this is where you got to find the roots of tyranny and evil. You can't just look to, oh, look what Pol Pot did, look what Hitler did, look what Stalin did, and everybody's on that surface layer. That's just the entry point to understanding this level that we've been looking at on the Unslaved podcast since 2016 now. And that's the advanced level. When you get to that, realize that the lines between good and evil boil down to the psyche of every living human being. It's not just the domain of one particular group or one gender or one race or one this or one that. It's at the base of consciousness that's been experienced by humanity for millennia. The potential there is there for everybody. Okay? So when you see the world imploding and society imploding, you got to get into this level of analysis in order to really understand. Or otherwise you're just blaming, oh, that person did this and this country did that and this event in history led to this event in history. And then here we are. You're still in kindergarten. This is what I've learned if you're thinking like that. Not to say that analysis doesn't have value, but it's actually got less value if you don't also take what I'm talking about here into the picture. This is just my opinion. take it for what it's worth. And so back to this typology, if we're talking master slave or inferior type versus superior type or whatever, now when you look at politics and we say right wing, left wing, this and that, it gets confusing, because I agree with the analysis that all this wings and left and right, liberal, Democrat, liberal, conservative, all this stuff, there's an illusion that's there for sure, especially when you find out that both wings of those political parties are mostly captured by people who are organized behind the scenes, who play parts, and like, oh, I'm playing the role of a conservative today, but I'm really going to be pushing left-wing ideology into my politics, or vice versa. And so then you got to go, okay, so there's something deeper going on than just some simple left-wing, right-wing politics. There's psychological typology involved here. So that's how I analyze it. So when I'm usually talking about leftists or right or extreme rights or all these people, these different political things, I'm thinking on the psychological type. What kind of type, psychological type, is going to be pulled in by those arguments that are put out on those official political party lines? And that's where the real insight can start to happen for you, is when you look at it from that perspective. That there's a reason why we're seeing the same types of people. They even have the same hair colors half the time, wear the same kind of clothes, right? On both sides. There's sort of like an identity that's also put out as a show of feathers, to say this is who I am. And the apple doesn't fall far from the tree. You start talking to somebody that has, the purple hair and the big wide rimmed glasses, and they're typically not very physically healthy, and they're kind of unkempt, and wild-eyed and a little bit, and you talk to them and you can probably predict what all of their political opinions are going to be. And then you find the clean cut, I'm wearing the suit and tie every single day of the week, I'm reading my Bible every single day and preaching the gospel, and I'm voting this way, and I'm doing and you can find that same archetypal, this is my team feather color, that I'm on this team and I'm expressing this. But that's all for show. What's behind all that facade? What's behind all those costume wearing and all those public performances, which is what most of this shit is when you really get into it? Most people don't deeply believe in what they talk about. They're playing the script so that they're identified as being part of the tribe. That's mostly what people are doing. There's obviously exceptions to that, but if you've been around long enough, you know what I'm talking about. It gets pretty predictable pretty quickly. And you find out everybody's fake, and not a lot of true blue in there. And that's why it's the challenge of trying to find out who are the true, who is authentic when they're talking about their political position or their opinion about anything. It's very hard to find authentic people. Mostly people are just regurgitating the opinions that they've been fed and that have won them over. And then you got to go, well, what motivated the fact that you adopted this as your facts and your background and your belief system and your opinion, and what motivated the guy that has the complete opposite? And then you go in deeper and you find out, oh my God, you're the same person. You're just on the two opposite ends of this little pretend game of mask wearing that we're all playing, right? So this is just, I don't know if this is making any sense. It's probably just a bunch of mumbo jumbo to some people, but I'm just trying to explain the way I've been looking at things lately, and it's been very enlightening, and it's been very consistent, and it's very fascinating to me, because you can learn a lot about yourself when you analyze it from this level. And so I invite you to go and check out some of these episodes we've done on Enslaved that some people whine and complain in emails. Why are we going to get to the meat and the conspiracy stuff and the fun stuff and the aliens and the pyramids and all the cool mystery stuff? Yeah, we've done shitloads of episodes on that, to the point of it being redundant. The concern now is more about, we keep running on this hamster wheel in our society, and we keep seeing the mass hysteria again and again. We keep seeing this dynamic, master-slave dynamic. And then we keep seeing the rise of tyranny and evil in our midst. Well, you got to get to the root of it. And you're not going to figure it out until you do. So that's what motivated my investigation into this psychology stuff. There's a lot of things in there that I don't really buy into, but it's worth looking at because it'll give you the insight you need to identify what's really going on, and then learn again how to take that wisdom from a Frank Herbert or some of these other great thinkers to free yourself, to unslave your own mind, and not just from the mass media propaganda, not just from the political propaganda, not just from the algorithmic manipulation going on social media, the fact that we're in a 5th generation asymmetric information war, because the whole world is at war in that way. It's also for your own personal development and your own ability to win the inner battle about the things that we do to ourselves to sabotage our own success, our own happiness, our own feeling of meaning in life. And how there's an entire industry designed to keep you in that net so that you are perfect cannon fodder for your masters that are the superiority types, but I told you already who they really are. They're secretly the inferior types that are overcompensating and pretending to be the kings of the roost. They're the emperor with no clothes. They're the fakers of the wolf in sheep's clothing, and they're pretending to be bigger and badder than they really are. They're really the little betas, the little men, the little women, the fearful. That's who the tyrants are. That's who they always are. So you will know them by their level of integrity and courage versus their level of manipulation, lies, deception, sneaking in the back door, stealing, the death of virtue, the hatred of wisdom. Like, you'll know them by their virtues or their lack of virtues. You'll know them by their fruits. Very simple. Don't fall for the costume wearing. Don't fall for the surface level. You got to look beyond the veil. So there's that. So much more we could be said, but I think we said it all in those unslaved episodes. So go and check it out. Next, a little bit about this little debate that was happening at the beginning of that episode with Douglas Murray. Now, I have a lot of respect for Douglas Murray on many things. There's some things I don't really agree with, but the man is, he knows what he's talking about on a lot of subjects. And I think it was kind of misunderstood what he was trying to communicate when the whole podcast on Joe Rogan opened up with him basically saying, we got to trust the experts. Like, that's what everybody got out of that. And they didn't hear out the nuance that was there, the concessions that Douglas Murray himself actually made to agree with Dave Smith and Joe Rogan about, because they made a good point. I actually agreed with a lot of what Dave Smith was talking about there when he was talking about how, hey, what are you talking about? We just got to trust experts. We just went through 2020 with the pandemic and we were told we have to trust the experts. And it turns out that the experts were wrong and a bunch of us average Joes were right. So what do you do with that when you're Mr. Let's just trust the experts? It's a valid argument. It's the argument I've made myself. I made that argument in Cult of the Medics, because I'm usually on team fuck the experts. I'm usually like, yeah, fuck you. What are you talking about? But I'm of two minds on this. Okay, I'm on two minds of this. Not because I'm confused about it, but because every issue is a dual face. Everything is a duality. Like, there's always pros and cons on both sides. You got to be able to look at this. And unfortunately, nuanced thinking doesn't trend. And that's why channels like mine, where I'm exploring these things, we don't really grow very well. We don't trend. I've been doing this for a long time, and I have never really trended or exploded or went viral or anything like that when it comes to what we're talking about. And that's just because people don't really want to think in a nuanced way, because this would require a lot of personal responsibility when it comes to their thinking. It would require a lot of hard thinking and introspection and study and work, and people don't like that. So it's not popular, but it's more accurate, I think, as a way of analyzing things going on. So there's that. But yeah, let's just quickly here. It doesn't have to take long to explain this. But I don't want to get into the ins and outs of what they said on the podcast, but it stimulated this in my head. I go, okay, well, I want to say a little bit on this. So I'm on team, fucking experts. Like, what are we talking about? Experts. What does that mean? Experts. Like when the media said during the pandemic, trust the experts, trust the science, blah, blah, blah. Though that word expert and science, those two words actually have valid meanings. Okay, those two words have valid meanings in our society. They have in all previous societies. You need science and you want to be able to trust it, because science should just be the naked observation of the facts of reality, and you form different hypotheses, and then you try to determine what is the closest you can get to analyzing what is the truth of the facts of reality. And you have to be able to be flexible when new information comes in, and your hypothesis should be able to change if you get more information. So we should operate on true scientific principles in our society. So yeah, you would want to trust that process. You want to trust that process. But when they said trust the science coming from the World Health Organization and Mr. Anthony Fauci and Mr. Bill Gates and, the Club of Rome and the whole thing and the World Economic Forum and all, and like, oh, these are the science now. Oh, okay. Wow. That's different than the scientific method. That's totally different. You're creating a cult. That's why I call it cult of the medics. I'm like, that's not science. That's you saying you are the authority on truth and you're not to be questioned. Because my argument was, here's a bunch of other scientists that are highly degreed, some of the top in their fields, that are challenging what the world powers decided was the standard of science during 2020, which was the World Health Organization. And you were not allowed to, no doctor I knew was allowed to question or challenge the great, high and mighty medical Vatican known as the World Health Organization. And so that was where my confusion was. It wasn't that I'm anti-science and I'm like, we don't want science. We want to go back to pre-scientific thinking. That is not how my argument ever was. My argument was, how can you trust the science when science isn't in agreement right now? And a lot of the agreement that we saw in the scientific community was sort of manufactured, wasn't it? And then we found out we've got issues with scientific studies that had to be retracted later on. And we had issues with particular individuals that turned out to be high-ranking criminals that were lying and they were committing scientific fraud. And then we found out that a lot of them were just wrong. They were just wrong. They made a hypothesis. They went with it. They made the whole world do the song and dance. Turns out they were wrong. Turns out those policies and that science ended up harming and killing people and our society and our way of life more than it helped. And so therefore, couch potatoes like me, average Joes, because we saw this, ended up being more correct in our analysis of what was going on. And it's not because we were experts. It's because we were just using basic logic and we were going, wait a minute, there's something wrong here. And I think we're going to find out a lot more about that as time goes on, but we'll see. So there's science and scientists who often will disagree with each other because you can get different perspectives of the same objective facts and you can come to different conclusions. And then there's when someone tries to centrally control that process. And those people in history were never the good guys. They're usually not. And then when they start censoring other scientists and other experts who have expertise in the field that they were in, that's when I went, oh, this isn't about trusting the experts. This isn't about finding experts and trying to hear what they're going to say and then following their advice and maybe getting second opinions or anything like that. There's a political agenda happening here to try to make it look like it's science, make it look like it's experts, but really they're not. Example, the leader of the World Health Organization, Tedros, his degree is not in medicine. His degree is in veterinary practices, right? Correct me if I'm wrong, but that's my memory of what I looked up when I looked him up. And then, Anthony Fauci has not been a practicing doctor for decades. And, there was some issues with some conflicts of interest going on, right? And so what if we find corruption behind those doors? What does that do to your expertise now? So we got to worry about that. We can't just automatically go, let's trust the experts. So Douglas Murray agreed with this loosely. He's like, oh, no, I know. I totally agree with you. I totally agree with you. And then he tried to explain his point. And the point was missed by so many people, including the guy, Dave Smith and Joe Rogan for some reason, where he was like, look, I agree with you guys that there's a problem in the scientific establishment, and there was a problem with that narrative, and that it was highly politicized. And he was trying to make that case where it was like, yeah, it was like fake experts, right? Fake science that was being cast as being the real deal. And that's why we were in that pickle. But then, and this is where I agree with him, I'm also thinking that we need to not just have every Joe Blow out there that has no real experience, no real expertise, gaining millions and millions of followers through their influence and leading them to false conclusions, just like the experts, the quote unquote experts that we critiqued during the pandemic. They have become very similar in the way they operate, where they're putting out only one side and they're not giving you the other side from actual experts who are valid experts in their fields, people that have been and seen and had the experience and done the education and actually do this for a living and spend all of their time researching these things. These are people that are experts. They've got the time to focus on it and see the details and the nitty gritty and the nuance and the different arguments and the different facts than the person that's just sort of looking at a Facebook post or watching a quick little snippet on YouTube or listening to some guy who really isn't an expert in his field, but sounds like he knows what he's talking about, and just agreeing with him because maybe they appealed to some kind of emotional argument or made a real simple logical equation for you. And you went, yeah, that made sense, so therefore I'm on that team now. But that's not really how real investigations happen, right? Like, you got to go deeper than that. And that's what I think Murray was trying to communicate in that bit. And even though there were some things he said that I was like, meh, but the way I see it is I'm on team, yeah, we should be questioning the experts that the government and the media and this big monopoly system is trying to put out as the experts to justify what they're doing to centralize power and control and censorship and all this shit. And the fraud that is behind that curtain that I've been trying to also expose myself, being that I am not an expert, but I've gained experience in this research field by doing this for over 20 years. So I've gained, I guess, little bits of expertise here and there, but I'm not any official expert. I didn't study at Oxford University and get some PhD doing something, right? So, you know, the challenge from Dave Smith was like, well, can I not say anything then? Am I, just because I'm an average Joe and I might not be an expert, or I might not have visited the place I'm critiquing, what's going on there, do I not get an opinion? You know, that's very undemocratic. We should all have a voice. And Douglas Murray was again, he's like, no, I'm not saying you can't say anything, but like, why should anybody believe you? Why should why are you, I think what he should have been talking about was, why are you speaking so authoritatively about it? Why are you not more open-minded? You're so passionate and emotional about this one side of the argument, and you're not looking at the other side, and you're not looking at all the expertise involved in analyzing it. And then you're out there giving that out, and that is contagious. So people also feel those feelings, also are not looking at the real expertise on the other side of these arguments, and then they're jumping to conclusions. And so that was his critique. And what do we do with that? Like, and what if those conclusions that you're coming to are just wrong? And they're wrong because you're an inexperienced white belt in this category pretending to be a black belt. And I can't remember who posted it, but they did make the white belt analogy because it is Joe Rogan, and Joe Rogan knows about jiu-jitsu and the whole thing. And, you know, he's done many rants on, you know, white belts critiquing black belts and all the people sitting on social media judging UFC fighters. Oh, look how tired he is. How come he didn't do anything? And it's like, they've never trained a day in their lives. Like, you're just the peanut gallery. Many times. But then in this case, he's on, we should just, you know, say whatever we want and fuck the experts, right? So to sum it all up, and that argument resonates with me because I work in a dojo, and I have had many instances where you've got these like white belt critiques from people who have all these opinions, and they're so authoritative in the way they talk about the way jiu-jitsu should be and how it should be taught, when they're talking about that to a black belt that's already been there and done that, and that white belt has no fucking clue what they're talking about, and the white belt is the loudest one in the room. We've had this many times, seen this many times, and that analogy reflects all throughout our society, right? So And it's definitely relevant to all these subjects we're talking about. And I question myself, like, why should I be talking about certain things that I'm really not that expert on, Like, doesn't mean I can't share my opinion, but like, we do have to be careful with what we're putting out there. And what I try to do is find the experts and say, look, I've studied the experts and I've looked at what their arguments are. And then I've looked at what the media is telling you their experts are saying. And I'm just sitting here objectively trying to say, like, let's look at this together. And, that's kind of my approach has always been, you got to research for yourself, right? But just because there's corruption in the field of experts in the scientific establishment, because there has been corruption that's happened, there's been fraud, I think there's geopolitical stuff going on in there, a lot of fakery going on, a lot of money drive, where what do they say? All the doctors and scientists agree with 100% with whoever's funding them, so there's conflicts of interest in the process of the expert fields. But we have to separate our critique of that from critiquing having experts to rely upon at all. And so that's why I'm also, as much as I'm on team, let's question and challenge the experts because of that problem of corruption and fraud that is in that field, we should also be on team merit. We can't forget that, right? If you want a true, free, prosperous society, merit-based outcomes is one of the pillars of that. Not just fake merit, where it's all pretend, So in jiu-jitsu, you aren't graded on how good your uniform looks. You're not graded on what you can draw on a whiteboard and theorize about because you watched a bunch of YouTube videos and listened to John Danaher 24/7 in jiu-jitsu, for example. He's just a big jiu-jitsu coach. You're graded on how you perform. You're graded on the outcome. You're graded on your merit, right? And that's how you rank up in real, authentic martial arts. In fake martial arts, you're promoted with the whole class. There is no difference. You're all black belts in 2 years, and you're all fake. And it's not real. It really isn't, And that happens also in all these other fields. So I'm on team question and challenge authority and the experts, as long as it's sane and rational, and as long as there's a reason for it, and as long as you can bring facts and evidence and logic to back up why you're challenging that expert class. But I'm also on team merit, which means every white belt in the room that has 100 million followers that gets to have opinions about something they really don't know anything about and are speaking as though they are. They got like a Dunning-Kruger effect going on where they're pretending to be an expert because they deeply wish they were, but they don't want to do the work that it would take to become an expert. I'm also on to this dynamic as well. And I spot it and I smell it a mile away. And it's a big problem, especially in this alternative research field. And we become, and then the average person that doesn't even think about any of this shit, they just find out whoever makes the most compelling argument to my psyche. And God knows what condition that psyche's in that's receiving that. Whoever can inspire my allegiance will get it. And then I will worship them as my leader. When you should be your leader. You should lean on the expertise of others and the experience of others. We all have to do that because none of us can get the whole picture. But you must sharpen your own critical thinking and sharpen your own discernment and your pattern recognition and your intuition. And there's a whole thing that has to come. That takes work and years of making mistakes, just like it takes work and years of making mistakes in martial arts or any other thing, any skill development that you're doing. So do we want to have people out there that know what they're talking about, that are the leaders in these discussion fields? And it doesn't mean we worship them. It doesn't mean we take everything they say. It doesn't mean we can't critique and challenge. But are the critiques and challenge coming with expertise as well? Are the critiques and challenge also coming with facts, evidence, logic, reason, right? Or are they just a bunch of mudslinging and trying to tear down the great man? Are they just, is it like a Howard Rourke situation? Is it that situation where it's just the crabs in the bucket trying to tear down the person that did do all that work and did achieve merit status and might not be right about everything, but still they should be respected for the work that they did. They shouldn't be just cast aside because they're an expert. They also shouldn't just be worshipped automatically because they're a, quote, expert. And then again, we have to delineate what's the difference between a true expert in their field who really knows what they're talking about and these fake experts, like these fake doctors they put up on TV to just read the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation script or whatever it is, or the World Health Organization script. You find out where the funding comes for these organizations. You just see, well, it's presented as though it's just all shiny and pure and scientific and logical, but really it's fake. And so, yeah, that's a problem. But knowing that problem does not excuse people to just go out and be the loud white belt in the room and say whatever the fuck they want, talking about shit they don't understand, and then influencing millions of people. Although I'm not into censorship, so I think people should all be, you're a victim of your own mental prison. And if you follow some cult leader and you follow some charlatan, that's on you, I'm not here to say we need government getting involved with this process. This is something that we have to figure out as a species. But we do have to watch out for that there's a nuance there, is what I wanted to point out, is that you should be challenging and questioning these quote unquote authorities and experts that are put in front of you, that end up all singing from the same chorus sheet and end up, basically pushing scientific fraud on the public. There's that. There's the issues with the scientific publication journals where there's lots of conflicts of interest that we've covered before. You can get into people like Dr. Marcia Angel. She wrote a whole book about it. She was the former editor of the New England Journal of Medicine, and she wrote about this problem in the scientific world. And many other people in the scientific world have written about this. It's in the field of archaeology. It's in the field of all these fields, right? So, but that doesn't mean you throw the baby out with the bathwater. That doesn't mean you say we got to get rid of the scientific method, and we should have no experts. What's going to happen when your car breaks down? What are you going to do? You don't know anything about your car. This is an example. You don't know anything about cars, especially modern cars. They're all like computers now. So your car breaks down. What are you going to do if you don't know how to fix it? You can't YouTube that shit. That takes a level of expertise that's beyond you just YouTubing it. All right. So then what are you going to do? Well, I got to go take it to an expert who is a car mechanic, who knows how to work these modern computer chips and fix my truck or my car. And then you go in there and he tells you, I got to replace the whole engine and gut the whole thing. It's me about 10 grand. And you go, okay, well, he's an expert. He knows more than me. So I'm kind of vulnerable right now. What I should do if I'm a logical person is maybe go get a second opinion. Maybe the guy up the road is going to tell you, buddy, I can get you back up and running for $500. No big deal. He's also an expert. Well, you're probably going to choose the $500 guy. And then you're going to be in that situation. You pay the guy $500 and one of two things happens. He was correct in his expert analysis and he fixed your vehicle and now you're off and running. Or he did a shit job and caused more problems. Turns out the first guy you went to that's like, yeah, it's $10,000. He was correct. And now it's $15,000 to fix, right? This is just adult life. This is just the way of it. You're always going to have to go see an expert with stuff you don't know and have any expertise in. And then you're going to have to do the next step of like, well, maybe I need multiple experts. And then you have to use your logic anyways to try to figure out which one is the best prescription for you to fix your problem. It's going to be the same when you're analyzing politics, when you're analyzing philosophy, psychology, history, any of this stuff. So we don't want to do away with experts, and we should. Douglas Murray had a point there. Also, Dave Smith had a point there. I'm just coming in the middle to say, hey, where do you find the balance there? I just gave you the balance. The balance is your mind is the balance. You have to decide in the end, what do you believe? Who are you going to trust? Who are you not going to trust? What are the conditions of your trust? Do you even have a list of conditions of what is it that wins your trust and what doesn't? What breaks it? Have we even thought to that level? Or do we just jump out there and just do things and just react to things and then just believe things? You know? So this is just sort of my thinking on it. You should become your own personal expert to the best degree that you can, but don't be afraid also to lean on other experts, especially if they're proven. Like in jiu-jitsu, for me, it's really easy because you get instant proof if somebody's an expert or not. Some guy walks in wearing a black belt and maybe you're like a purple belt or something and you roll with that black belt And because it's all trial by actual practice. Like there's no theoretical nothing in jiu-jitsu. It's like you can either do it or you can't do it. And we know what the standards are. And if you roll with that black belt and that black belt feels like a white belt, then you're like, well, you're a fake black belt, because I know what a real black belt feels like. I know what a real expert feels like. You feel like you've just fallen off a cliff and you're grabbing branches and you're just breaking and you just feel like you're drowning. You feel there's nothing you can do. That's a black belt. The black belt is like untouchable, right? And so you know that from experience. And that's an expert. And you're going to listen to the expert that is proven to you to be an expert versus the expert that's pretending to be an expert, right? So just carry that into your belief decisions that you're making every second of every day as you scroll your social media feeds and try to keep up with the Joneses of what's going on, and extrapolate this formula out to where you're concluding on various matters. And every time I try to challenge people and stuff, they go, well, listen to my guy. Here's my guy. He's going to give you the argument, which is just telling me, yeah, okay, you're giving me your expert. Here's 10 of experts from my side of it. In the end, we're both sitting here making decisions as to who we're going to trust. What's the quality of your analysis about who you can trust as an expert or not? That's what I'm concerned about, because I'm not a particular expert myself. I've maybe become an expert at trying to find out the experts. Maybe that's even too generous. I don't know. But this is the conundrum everybody faces right now. So the only thing I can conclude at the end of this, to finish this up, because I don't want this to be too long, just stay humble in your search for truth. Like, it's not hard. We don't need to be so committed to all these theories and ideas and beliefs and opinions about what's going on. Just observe reality, and sometimes you're going to be on this side of the fence and sometimes you're going to switch to this side of the fence, because we're trying to figure out what's happening, right? And even like the other problem with experts is they're only expert, they're tunnel visioned. They're only experts in their field. They have to put so much time and energy into their field of expertise. And we need these people because we need someone that knows that much about a thing or a subject. But they could be flawed if you're a more objective person. That's why I kind of like being more of a jack of all trades person, is that I have the ability to say, well, that guy's really, really, really good at that field of expertise. But when he starts commenting outside of his lane, I'm like, ignore that shit and get to the real gems of their expertise. And that's why that thinker is valuable to me. You have to have that ability to do that. Don't just throw the whole thing out. But you got to know when, well, if I want to talk, I'm not going to go to Douglas Murray on this subject over here. I'm going to go to somebody else that's better, who knows, ancient Greek philosophy or whatever it is, right? Or I'm going to go to someone else that knows more on those subjects. But when he's talking about his field, or that person's talking about their field over there, I better listen up, because they're proven in battle. They're proven in the real world, right? And there's many ways that you can get better at this intuitive ability to spot the flaws in some of these people, and then also see the beauty in some of these people. That's why we can do shows on Unslaved, and Michael will cover a guy like, we just did a show on Alfred Adler, okay? Who had a genius mind. If you read his work and you see what he produced, he had a genius level thought on his subject. He was an expert in his field. He developed a field called individual psychology, to which it resonated deeply when I read it and learned about it, as it did with Michael, which is why he presented it, because it was a phenomenal idea that it's like you can be your own psychologist in a way. You can do inner work. It was like the groundswell of that thinking. But it turns out the guy's a raging communist, and he went down that track on a political level. So then you go, wow, I'm not into communism. Let me just throw all of that out. Well, a nuanced genius thinker will tell you that's a mistake. You don't have to agree with someone's politics, and maybe you can even get into an understanding of why they went that way with their thinking at that time. And maybe if that guy lived it longer and would have seen more of the unfolding of that century he lived in, he would have changed his mind, right? Because there was more proof later of the fact that there was so much flawed with this. And maybe you can see the guy was more of a humanitarian, which is why he leaned more left and he went more communistic. He wasn't coming from the totalitarian, radical insanity level, right? So these are the things that you get into these nuanced positions on, right? And there's other thinkers too. You can get it going back to Plato or Nietzsche or Heidegger or Aristotle or fucking Sam Harris or Jordan Peterson or Michael Tesserin or David Icke or Alex Jones or Elon Musk or any of these characters, these people, you're going to find pros and cons. You're going to see the dualistic nature of reality right in front of you. And then you're going to realize, wow, there's pros and cons about me as well. I'm right about some things, wrong about other things. I'm really good over here and I'm really weak over here. We're all this, right? So just stay humble in your pursuit of truth. This is the mantra that's been in my mind lately. And it's why sometimes I doubt. I don't always just go right on and produce work on every single event happening, because I'm still trying to gather information and it's just kind of hard to keep up these days. And I want to stay honest in my pursuit. So I'm just there to give you a little bit of bigger perspective on things, and hope it helps your thinking process a little bit and you find some value with it. So yeah, get into studying the master-slave dynamic and the inferior versus superior types. Learn how to identify those tendencies within your own psyche. Learn how to cleanse that so you can free your mind, unslave your mind, and then learn that nuanced thinking when it comes to, should I trust experts? Should I challenge or question them? Is it just black and white? Is there shades of gray in there? Just listen, learn, observe, stay humble, keep seeking, stay curious, keep your thinking alive, keep it current, and don't be afraid to change your mind on things. In fact, that's what's necessary for growth in your thinking over time. So hope that has some value, guys. We'll catch you again soon. Cheers, everybody.